is the Capitol Rundown.
You can spell it M-O-N-E-Y and D-E-V-O-S. DeVos money, a DeVos endorsement, has completely changed the complexion of the candidates who are left on the ballot.
The Democratic Party always focuses on guns. And if you look at the school shooting, unfortunately, in Texas, that was a gun-free zone.
We don't have to live like this. The question is, how many Republicans would join us to save children's lives?
I would hire retired law enforcement and veterans to help protect our schools.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Lauren Thompson. A Texas community and Americans across our country are still mourning and trying to process that tragic elementary school shooting. The massacre in Uvalde, Texas is now the second deadliest school shooting in American history. 19 children and 2 teachers were gunned down just days before their summer break. An 18-year-old armed with an AR-15 style weapon stormed a classroom, barricaded himself inside, and shot the students and teachers who were in there. Michigan U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow was among those who spoke out this week after those shootings. She had planned on talking about school lunches on Wednesday, but the events in Texas changed her speech. Instead, she asked for bipartisan support to help end the violence.
We don't have to live like this. We don't have to live like this. The question is, how many Republicans would join us to save children's lives from gun violence? How many? Can we just get started? You know, Leader Schumer's put 2 bills on the calendar related to background checks. Bipartisan Background Checks Act, closing the gun show loophole, requiring background checks for gun purchases made through private, unlicensed leaders, and the Enhanced Background Check Act, which would provide a national background check system enough time to thoroughly review gun sales. Now, these are not controversial.
Candidates running for Michigan governor are sharing their thoughts in the wake of this latest school shooting as well. The Rundown caught up with Republican candidate Garrett Soldano. Listen to what he had to say.
We have to move farther away from just this one issue that what it seems like is the Democratic Party always focuses on guns. And if you look at the school shooting, unfortunately, in Texas, that was a gun-free zone. And so there has to be more emphasis on not only school security, which I'm going to bring to the table as Michigan's next governor, because this is an all hands, all above approach that we're going to need, because number one, we have to make sure that the schools are secure. That's your windows, your doors are locked, one point of entry. We need to secure the parking lot with one point of entry and exit, right? And if there's going to be police officers or ex-military or ex-police officers be security, we have to make sure those are all in place.
The Rundown also caught up with Republican candidate Ralph Reband. He tells us more needs to be done to prevent something like this from happening again.
What I would do as governor, I would put gun-sniffing dogs in schools. I would hire retired law enforcement and veterans to help protect our schools because, you know, our kids need to go to school and be safe. They need to know that they're not going to run into these kind of issues at our schools ever again, either in Michigan or across the country.
Well, coming up next here on The Rundown, the school shooting has certainly reignited the gun law debate in Washington, D.C. We'll take you to our nation's capital to hear what both sides are saying when the Capitol Rundown comes right back. Welcome back. We continue our coverage now in the wake of the elementary school shooting in Texas. Gun laws are once again front and center in our nation's capital. Republicans are pushing back on Democrats' calls for tougher gun legislation and are pointing to mental illness as the main issue behind these mass shootings. This morning, The Rundown's Andrew Burkle and ABC political director Rick Klein take a deeper dive into what each party wants to do. Here they are now with more.
Way too many lives lost, but what's going on Capitol Hill as far as legislation with this?
There's at least the glimmers of bipartisanship right now with some Republicans and Democrats sitting behind closed doors to try to figure something out. Notably, the Democrats decided not to tee off a series of votes that they knew would fail. They recognize that the math is where it is, and they want to see if there's any room for compromise, maybe a couple of things the Democrats want to do in terms of age changes, maybe red flag laws and the like, maybe some things Republicans want to do in terms of school safety and hardening facilities that could be targeted. Bottom line, I don't think there's a lot of optimism around any of this. I think we've seen this movie before many, many times over the last decade plus. But at least initially, there's a tiniest of little windows of potential talk.
We saw during Governor Greg Abbott's press conference, Beto O'Rourke standing up and having some type of back and forth with some of the people on the stage there. How was that received in the political landscape here?
I think without questioning his the sincerity of his beliefs, I think it was seen as performance. He's running for governor. He wants Greg Abbott's job. He's a grown-up. He knows exactly what he's doing. We were told that it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Maybe that's the case, but it's not like he lost control of his bodily functions. He knew that this was a highly watched, nationally televised event. Greg Abbott and other Texas officials were laying out the sequence of events. It was a very newsy time. It didn't appear to be a politically motivated or grandstanding moment on the part of Governor Abbott or the lieutenant governor or local officials or senators and the like that were there. But Beto changed that, and I think he knew what he was doing by injecting himself there. And again, I'm sure he's heartfelt in his beliefs and in wanting to put that into the conversation. He clearly felt the El Paso shooting a few years ago in his hometown in a visceral way. But I do think most people saw it for what it was, which was a political stunt.
Well, still to come this morning on the Capitol Rundown, we shift our attention to the race to become Michigan's next governor. It was a controversial week for many Republicans in the running. Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic has all those details for us next. Well, there's no doubt it was another big week here in Michigan politics this week. The state elections board found that 5 Republican candidates running for governor turned in too many fraudulent signatures to keep their names on the ballot. The Rundown's Jorma Duran and our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic are here now to break this down.
It's time to get updated politically here in the state of Michigan, and nobody better than this guy right here, Tim Skubic. Tim, I can't wait to talk to you about what's going on with who is or isn't going to be on the GOP ballot for the governor's race. We're talking a couple of big names.
This is an incredible story. The story Monday, we wake up and find that there was alleged fraud in some of the petition signatures turned in by the candidates running for governor, 5 of them. As a result, one of them drops out. Michael Brown, who's with the state police, he's out. We have 4 others who are now arguing, wait a second, you can't kick us off the ballot. And so this week, the State Board of Canvassers took testimony from all the lawyers on whether this was legal or not, what the State Elections Bureau did, which basically determined that these 4 candidates that are now left, including James Craig and Perry Johnson, 2 of the people that were considered to be at the upper tier of a large field, that they basically failed to get 15,000 signatures. And they basically said, no, we don't agree with that, and so they're going to the courts. The courts will likely have to decide whether these people go on the ballot or not. It is a huge mess. There are lots of legal arguments on both sides of this issue. And so in the Republican primary for governor, it is basically, it's confusing at the least and confounding at the most.
Have you heard of, I have to believe this has happened before, but not in such a large scale. And what are the chances that those candidates do get on the ballot?
Yeah, Jorma, that's a good point. Yes, there's always been some noodling around on signing petition signatures. But here's what's happened, and the noodling has gone significantly further. They were dangling $20 a signature, not $20 a sheet, $20 a name to put on these petitions. So what these folks did, and there were 36 of them allegedly involved, they sat around the table, they had sheets of petition, and they what they called round robin each sheet around the table, and everybody took a whack at signing somebody's phony name on these sheets, and then they turned them in. And they got caught. At least the state says they did. Now the question is, what impact will that have on the courts, as the courts now have to decide, did these candidates meet the threshold of 15,000 signatures? And that is going to be the question, and how the court answers it will determine whether there are 9 people in the field for governor or only 5.
Well, I do know that once I found out, Tim, on who was remaining for the GOP gubernatorial race, I thought, wow, Tudor Dixon's got a big smile on her face. And she's also received, I think, a pretty good endorsement. What do you know?
Pretty good, yeah. You can spell it M-O-N-E-Y and D-E-V-O-S. DeVos money, a DeVos endorsement, has completely changed the complexion of the candidates who are left on the ballot. And Tudor Dixon, the now only remaining female in the field, is the beneficiary of the money from the DeVos family, which does two things for her right now that she didn't have. She didn't have name ID. She had 1.5% in the polls. This money will help to buy her some exposure to give her name ID, and it will make her competitive. And it basically, a lot of people in this town are saying it comes down to a two-person race between Tudor Dixon and Kevin Rinke, the former multi-million-dollar car owner down in Macomb County, which could be an interesting race. And an interesting sidebar story. Months ago, Kevin Rinke went to Tudor Dixon and said, "I'd like you to be my running mate." Now he will likely face her as a possible candidate who doesn't want to be his running mate. She wants the job. Maybe she'll offer the running mate thing to him. Either way, the dynamics with the DeVos getting involved completely changes the complexion, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Tudor Dixon is a significant factor in this Republican primary for governor.
Wow, very interested to see what happens. Tim, always great to talk to you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jorma. Everybody have a peaceful and restful weekend, okay?
Thank you both. Well, we also asked ABC Political Director Rick Klein about this. He says he's never seen anything like it.
Half of the Republican field was tossed out over signatures, false signatures, fake signatures, whatever you want to say. Has this ever happened on this wide of a scale? And is this something that, you know, is going to become kind of a political tactic going forward?
I have never seen this many candidates eliminated in one fell swoop. Historically, there are candidates, often they're caught by surprise by maybe a firm that they hire or other kind of an issue that confronts itself. But to have half the field wiped out, including some of the better known names, the top prospects that the Republicans had, is really stunning. And I think, look, as a tactic, people will challenge signatures. It's one way to stop a candidacy. But I've never seen this many all at once to have this kind of an issue. And, you know, I think without getting into any of the specific details around it, it's almost political malpractice. I think any campaign that knows how to do this stuff far exceeds the numbers that's required and doesn't have an issue with just appearing on that ballot.
Well, we still have a lot to cover this morning. President Biden is working to reform policing across the country. We'll tell you what step he took this week when the Capitol Rundown comes right back. This week, President Joe Biden signed an executive order to address policing practices nationwide. Our Washington correspondent Raquel Martin is here this morning from the White House with more.
Wednesday, President Joe Biden signed an executive order to reform policing practices nationwide.
This executive order is going to deliver the most significant police reform in decades.
The action comes on the 2-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. Floyd's family was among a group of victim families who attended the signing.
As divided as this nation can feel, today we're showing the strength of our unity.
The president's executive order would do things like create a national database to track police misconduct and restrict the use of chokeholds and no-knock warrants. It also mandates body-worn cameras, but the majority of the order only applies to federal officers.
There's no substitute for legislation, but it is a necessary and long overdue critical step forward.
And he's doing the right thing.
Ohio Democrat Joyce Beatty, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, applauded the president's effort.
We've lost too many lives, and this is a step of great progress.
And Texas Democrat Sheila Jackson Lee says Democrats will continue to push for more reforms on Capitol Hill.
We will not ignore you.
Widespread reform will require bipartisan support in the Senate. But when asked about the president's efforts, Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley said he thinks President Biden's priorities are misplaced.
I think that we ought to be helping local law enforcement hire more cops. I'd like to see 100,000 new cops. We need it.
In Washington, Raquel Martin.
Don't go nowhere, because after the break, we stay in D.C. and take a look at a plan to help low-income communities across our country. The Capitol Rundown. We'll be right back. The White House launched a week of action to highlight the Biden administration's investments in underserved communities this week. The Rundown caught up with the White House National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy. She's here for you now with a closer look at the efforts.
This is all about President Biden's executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, which the president put in place, including the most ambitious environmental justice agenda ever undertaken by an administration. It commits to centering communities that have been overburdened by pollution on the front lines of climate impact and that have been marginalized by decades of underinvestment. So instead of being at the back of the line, they're really at the front of the line in terms of the opportunities of things like the bipartisan infrastructure law. And it's really not a coincidence that Justice 40 initiative is happening now. It's because we want to make sure that federal agencies deliver 40% of the overall benefits of our climate and clean energy and affordable and sustainable housing and our clean water investments, all to disadvantaged communities, so that we can actually make sure that they're getting their fair share of the investment moving forward. So we're talking about giving our kids clean air to breathe and clean water to drink, making sure that we're reducing those carbon emissions that lead to climate change. But it's also about creating jobs and businesses and economic revitalization for the communities that have been historically left behind. And we're talking about protecting and honoring those communities because we know they're bearing the worst impacts of climate change, and they have the most to gain from the investments that are available today, and we want to make sure they get their fair share. So it's an exciting week. It talks about all of the hundreds of federal programs that represent billions of dollars in annual investment that the president pulled together with the bipartisan infrastructure law, and how we're reimagining and transforming so that we can make sure that those benefits that the agencies have available actually go to those disadvantaged communities through this new Justice 40 initiative.
Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown. We hope to see you again next weekend.